presentation is a joint one by Tony George and myself, and as soon as we get it up, I can perhaps go over most of it. Tony has done the analysis on the data that was collected during this event, and he can explain anything related to ocular or ROTE. Let's see if Ted can locate it. Oh, okay. Okay, I guess we're ready to start. All right, so this is an event involving a 13 magnitude star and an asteroid. I don't remember the name of it because it's been so long since I made this presentation up. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, here we go. This is the asteroid Boliviana, magnitude 12.7, and the star itself was magnitude 13.2 with a total delta magnitude drop of 0.5. We had a 100% moon phase, and the offset from the star position was essentially 6 moon diameters or 3 degrees. And from where I was positioned, the star was directly over and inside the Phoenix light bubble, but the sky was clear. Next slide, please. So here's the path of this event. You can see it moving over California, Arizona, and Texas. Had a fairly decent prediction. Next slide, please. Well, that's another. So this is the slide that's of most importance, because who would go and look at a 13th magnitude star next to a full moon? I mean, nobody in their right mind, which tells you something about me. So the first thing you normally do is toss it, because it's clearly a ridiculous event to deal with. Or if you're bored like me, you try it out of desperation. Or 3, use it as a test of whatever capabilities you had with your telescope and optical configuration. Next slide, please. So this is my current site. I have a C11 equatorially mounted, and I have a relatively good sky condition, although it's, again, I'm located on the edge of the Phoenix metropolitan area proper, and so you might say it's the edge of civilization, because where I live is a delimiting point to where you don't have to have a septic tank, you don't have to have your own well. But if you move a few blocks or a few miles north of me, that's not the case at all. You're out in the sticks. Next slide. So I asked Ernie Iverson to set up some pre-point charts for me, and he did that. He always does this and does a really great job of it. And so I decided to set up about an hour and a half prior to the event, because the moon obviously being real close, nobody wants to set up very close to the time of the event. So I chose this particular star configuration. There's a bright star here and a fainter star next to it, and figured, well, this is going to be easy. I'll just set up there and just let the target star drift into the field and see what I get. Next slide, please. So here is a camcorder screen view 14 minutes after the closest approach to the moon of the star. And what do you see? Well, you can see the Kiwi GPS coordinates, and supposedly there's a star here and there's a star there and there's nothing else, which is a lot more than I would expect us to have seen. I would have assumed it had been a total washout. Next slide. Now on a clear night, if I take a 15-second exposure, you can see all these stars. I have a pretty good sky when there's no moon around. Next slide. So in this particular situation, I was using my clock drive, and Tony was the one who was involved in the analysis, and normally he uses iMovie, or Brad will do the same thing on my videos, and they can process the results either with my clock drive on or in the off position. And so typically I take 30 seconds of video at a bare minimum in order to get the baseline noise recorded, and obviously more video is better. Next slide. So Tony went and used Registax and stacked a bunch of images together, and lo and behold, a blank screen all of a sudden has got some actual stars in it. And again, this is 3 degrees from a full moon, where you can't see anything and the camcorder shows nothing. These are dust motes in the field, as well as real stars. Next slide. Now, when one gets pre-point charts, as I do, I assume that they're correct. In fact, I look at them and don't check them over extremely well. In this particular case, I made a horrible error by not realizing that when Ernie prepared the charts, he used the wrong event time. And in fact, it was a total accident. I didn't catch it. The predicted time of the occultation should have allowed me to drift all the way up to this point. Here's the target star, but in fact, what I didn't notice is that I was actually set up on this field. So I was looking at the wrong place. Next slide. And this is another example using C2A of the field of view of the actual image, which is not where it was supposed to be. And so this event actually wouldn't have succeeded anyway, because 13th magnitude is way too faint to be picked up, but it was a great exercise. Next slide. Okay, so it turns out that the field of view was actually 90 seconds of time off, so you know, there was no way that I could possibly have recorded the field, even if the star was brighter. Next slide. And this is the first time I think this has ever happened. So Tony did some photometry, and this is his light curve. He found a 10.3 magnitude star. He found what should have been a 12.3 magnitude star, and then this would have been a blank field with no star at all. Next slide. He ran ocular to determine the detectability of specific magnitude stars based on their predicted delta M. Now, in this particular case, the star was, I believe, 12.7, and the 13th magnitude, and the delta M was 0.5. And so this was the data input that he used in order to calculate whether detectability would have occurred with a delta M of 2.0 and a magnitude 12.2 star. Next slide. He ran a second analysis to determine a 10.4 magnitude star with a delta M of 0.5, because that was equivalent to what we were seeing here. Next slide. And then he developed another set of criteria for determining detectability of the same type of star with a delta M of 0.5, and came up with these values. Next slide. Now, this is a case where I did an occultation of Pallas where the delta M was 0.08, and this is the result of what Tony was able to find. He actually picked up this occultation, which, again, I thought this was an impossible scenario, but Tony proved me wrong, and he actually found a 63-second occultation in the data that I got. Again, this is somewhat unrelated to the initial theme of this particular presentation, but it does show that some things that you might think are completely impossible can be possible. Next slide. And this is the result and the fit of my observation based on Joseph Durek's model. I think there are 3 observations here. I believe mine is this one here. So again, a 0.08 magnitude drop is definitely possible, and you can see by all 3 of these chords how well it fits the existing model. Next slide. So I compare what Tony's doing using some of the techniques he's doing to what Miroslav Druckmiller is doing in the solar eclipse field, where you can take what used to be the standard really great image that looked like this, and now he's turning into things like that. So again, the possible, the impossible, where you can see lunar surface features and all this crazy detail. Obviously, software tricks are used to produce this sort of thing, but then again, software is what IOTA needs to do the impossible types of analysis that we thought couldn't be done before. Next slide. So the conclusions are basically that not everything cannot be done. Even if you see a really awful looking set of circumstances for a particular occultation, you can possibly do them if you have the right equipment and you have the right environment and circumstances. So this is sort of a lessons learned exercise. Even though I screwed up on the star position, it wouldn't have really mattered anyway because we had enough stars to do the analysis. So what Tony concluded here is detecting a 13.2 magnitude star within 3 degrees of 100% moon with current technology is not possible with the type of telescope and camera system that I was using. Again, I was using a Wattek 120N and my Celestron 11. Detecting a 10th magnitude star with a delta M of 0.5 and a duration of more than 3 seconds is possible. And finally, detecting a 12.2 magnitude star with a delta M of 2.5 and a duration more than 10 seconds is possible within 3 degrees of the moon. That's the lessons learned from these 2 things. So normally, you might not necessarily have either one of these 2 conditions existing, but I don't think I'm going to look again in the future to find a star 3 degrees from the moon unless it's really bright. And I believe that's the last slide. Is that correct, Brad?
Yes, correct.
It is correct. Okay. Are there any questions? Yeah, the question is, Roger asks is whether the conclusions were based on the stacking, and the answer is yes. Okay. Any other questions?
Does the distance of 3 degrees is going to be trying to say is the amount of scatter in the atmosphere differs between different locations. So 3 degrees is not always going to be 3 degrees. Arizona's 3 degrees will scatter light a lot less than the full moon than New Hampshire's 3 degrees.
Yeah, okay, so Ted is asking whether the 3 degree offset based on my site in Arizona is not equivalent to all sites, and certainly that's the case. 3 degrees in Miami, for example, with all the humidity and stuff in the air, might produce a much more different situation. In fact, the Arizona seeing conditions are quite good. I rarely ever see an unstable image when I'm taking video, but in Houston, it's not uncommon to see very great flickering, even like we saw this morning with the grays, where the atmosphere is so terrible that these sorts of statistics or these sort of conclusions really don't even apply. So this is sort of an ideal set of circumstances and not necessarily the norm.
So in an atmosphere like Miami's and Florida's, these might apply, but the distance might be 8 or 10 degrees.
So Ted's comment is that these conclusions might apply with a much larger offset, like 8 or 10 degrees from the moon, and the answer is probably yes. I think what would have to happen, you'd have to record video under those circumstances. Tony would have to analyze it and come back and determine whether that's the case or not. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right. So Tony's answer is obviously stacking was not used to derive the conclusions. It's just to find the star, and he's being modest and saying what he's doing is not as good as Druckmiller. I tend to disagree with him. Okay, so that distance from the moon, you could likely get the same stars but record shorter possible events. So yeah, that's certainly the case. David?
Yeah, but with that recently with the 12.3 magnitude star, and so I went out with my 10-inch and did a couple of demonstrations. So anyway, did a 12.3 magnitude star out in the field. I've set the telescope up. It was in a turn-off road into a cornfield. But it turned out it was humid, and it turned out within about 5 minutes after I left, ground fog came in, and there was about a 98% sunlit moon 25 degrees away, so it was not as bad as these conditions. But when I got back and looked at the recording, it was just all white. so it might magic. I know the things people.
Okay, well, I don't know about that, but I can certainly relate to your experience. I think almost everybody here has experienced the same thing where you go out and try to see something, and the background is just so awful that you know I can't imagine how many recordings I've thrown away in the past where I didn't even think that Tony could do an analysis on this. So now that I know that I need to really save everything regardless of how terrible it looks. I mean, you saw the image. There's just nothing there. Why would anybody want to keep it? And yet, Tony can do stuff, even though he's very modest about it, and make it happen. So not in all cases, because I had an occultation not too long ago that, in fact, it was June 27th, I went to Aruba to do a double occultation of two bright stars. And Aruba is extremely windy, and so I had my 80 millimeter set up, and it was totally clear, and just within seconds of the occultation, a cloud came over, went right through the field of view, and then left. There was no other clouds, but the wind was blowing, so Tony couldn't do the analysis. So there's just always something that seems to jump in and mess things up. But again, based on some of the tools that he has access to, he can and has pulled out some really amazing things. Joan? Yeah, Joan was commenting that in Indonesia, I think it's the Regulus occultation. Oh, yeah, Dagmar and Regulus, yeah. Okay, that there was a lot of lightning in the vicinity that tends to kind of whiten things out. And even last night, before the occultation, I had a site set up near 177 and south of Perkins, and when I saw the lightning coming up, I actually took a photograph of it to see if I could see how bad it was or where it was going. And even that was causing problems with my camera because I had the camera pointed in that direction, and it would tend to saturate the field. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, you get the same thing if you're too close to sunrise or sunset, and the background is really extreme, or again, if you're too close to the moon. I used to be afraid of pointing my PC-164EX2 at the moon. In fact, when we did the Dagmar occultation in Saudi Arabia, we had some of the guys that were using my Mighty Minis pointing it at the moon. I was freaking out thinking it was going to totally wipe out the chip, but of course it never did. And that, right, and we tried to do that too, but the local guys that had control of my Mighty Minis, they all of them except one pointed on the wrong star, if you can believe it. It was really an unfortunate situation. So, but anyway, this was a good exercise.
wind make the difference? It
Yeah.
not makes a difference in the star image that the telescope.
Right. So Tony's comment here is in my description of the Lomia occultation, that if the wind had not been present and the image was stable, then he could have integrated out that image even through the cloud and hopefully have gotten some sort, because the stars were bright. I think one was 8.1, the other was 7.5. So very bright stars, and normally under regular conditions, very easy to see. Go ahead.
Point out about wind stability. That's a big advantage of the paver mounts. They're really rock solid, and you're setting this thing down on the ground, and it's in a rail, and the wind just won't affect it. It's much better than the tripods we were using in the past.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.